Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are headed into our final segment of the day, being the championship preview for tonight. We have two number one seeds in what should be a classic matchup, ideally here, assuming that UConn isn't the Death Star that they have, shown to be as of late. But the number one overall seed and the number 3 overall seed facing off. You have some really good storylines surrounding both of them, with UConn looking to be those repeat champions, Dan Hurley looking to establish himself as one of the best coaches in the world right now in the game of college basketball. I'm sure he's already in that broad conversation, but in terms of really establishing himself as the one, this would be an incredible chance to do so. I feel like a lot of people still probably lean along the likes of a Bill Self. Maybe you go with Kelvin Sampson, but I think it's got to be between Self and Hurley, and this would be an absolutely massive moment to step up and make that a little bit more of a reality, although it's, of course, a subjective topic. But there's that versus Purdue being that revenge story after being embarrassed last season and really the past few seasons, but losing to Fairleigh Dickinson last year, and have the chance to sort of pull off this Virginia-like redemption story where Virginia, after being the first team to ever be upset by a 16 seed, they went on to win the national championship in 2019. Purdue might do that same thing. Again, I feel like Purdue has absolved itself of a real embarrassment necessarily, unless they get, they lose by 30 points or something. That would be tough. But, other than that, this has been, and even if they do, this has been a very productive and this has been a very good season for Purdue, making it back to their first final since 1980, even a handful more years since they've made it to the championship game. But, you have the storylines, and when you talk about the marketability of individual players, we've talked about Edey in the past, where he's not necessarily the most popular in college basketball. There's this extremely arrogant take of he's just good because he's tall, which is something that I just could never ever get behind, in terms of you look at the way that he actually operates in the post and the footwork and the touch. All of it takes, real impressive skills. Taco Fall was like 7'6", and he made for a great moment during that matchup against Zion and Duke in, I think it was 2019. Yeah, it was 2019. But, he was never doing what Edey has done, and that's just being an absolutely dominant force. And I just feel like Edey is at this level of disrespect, and in an era where we see all this player movement and the transfer portal, a lot of people get upset about that because of the fact that it's hard to sort of have that idea of actually sticking around and longevity and everything. Edey has stuck it out with a program that was upset 3 years in a row by a double-digit seed, and he was able to stick with it and now find himself in the championship game, averaging 28 points and 15 rebounds through the first set of tournament games. I feel like more people should be giving him his respect, but as has been a little bit of a theme with today's show, there's just the toxic nature behind sports fandom that is pretty disappointing to see, but at the same time, not really sure what there is to do to correct that. But he's going to be matching up against Klingon, who has skyrocketed in terms of the level of expectations and hype headed into the 2024 draft. He's been one of the biggest climbers, if not the biggest climber, for prospects in the upcoming draft based off of tournament play specifically. But should be a really entertaining matchup to see, where you have the arguments of, oh, well, he's just good because he's tall. Really, it's more so an argument against Edey, but he's about to match up against a 7-footer that is going to be a lottery pick in the NBA, and he's not obviously quite NBA level just yet, but he's going to be. And this is the second time ever having two listed 7-footers starting against one another in a championship game. Last time that happened was 1984, Patrick Ewing versus Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, is this a two Hall of Famer situation? Probably not, but at the same time is something different that we never really see in college basketball, and it should be incredibly entertaining to watch. I am curious to see how both of these players match up. Clingan isn't necessarily, a post player that has excellent footwork or anything, but he is obviously a massive threat in the pick and roll game. Edey has proven to be a little bit of a liability at times in the pick and roll game. How is he going to be able to handle this? A lot of the time, we see him playing more drop coverage, staying in the paint when other teams try and run that type of action. UConn has the ability to fire away from three and make teams pay. So that should be very interesting to sort of monitor that specific matchup. And when you look at the spread as things currently stand on ESPN Bet, it is 6.5 in favor of UConn. First time in who knows how long that UConn hasn't been favored by double digits, but I do think that UConn is going to win this game. All of the statistics necessarily, the fact that they can play pretty much any game they want to. They're an extremely malleable team. We saw for a team that is as talented as they are on defense, they were able to sort of play a little bit more of a shootout type style against Alabama last week. They ended up taking more three-pointers than Alabama did, and Alabama was, if not, I believe they were number one. If not, they were up there in terms of points per game. And they are just able to really fit themselves into any type of category and any type of play style that they need to capitalize on, as Hurley, again, has just done such a good job of restructuring this roster after losing 3 guys to the NBA last season to, 3 of their top 6 players, and to now be back in this position with a potential to be 37-3, which obviously, yes, we know that South Carolina just went undefeated in the women's side, but I would argue that it's sort of harder to have that same level of, undefeated expectations in the men's game, and UConn is just at a different level. As far as taking the spread, I would probably lean in favor of UConn. I just think that they are that good, but Purdue also is a very good team too, so I hope Purdue does cover. I hope that this is a close game. Feels like in past years, everybody loves the upsets when it comes to sort of those first few rounds and having the Cinderella type stories. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it feels like this is sort of where we want to be, where we have 2 of the best teams facing off against each other. I feel like the most similar sort of situation we saw was Baylor and Gonzaga a couple years ago. And I'm just really excited to see how this all plays out here. Again, I love the game that UConn plays. I was actually, and I didn't mention it, I should have mentioned it some in our last segment, but I think that Cam Spencer is also somebody who flies really under the radar. His patience level and his decision making is so effective. Also, obviously, the fact that he's a knockdown shooter from 3, but I just feel like he's somebody that can also probably, if he gets Edey in space, he can make the right decisions. And I don't know, I just think that it's going to be really hard for Purdue to shut down that UConn offense, as every other team has basically struggled with doing so as well. Is this the matchup that things change? I'm not sure about that. Purdue is probably going to have to turn this into a, high-scoring game, which they are more than capable of doing. Probably have to try and get Clingan into foul trouble. I was looking it up the other day, And I don't believe that Klingon has had more than 3 fouls since mid-February. There was a game against DePaul where he picked up 4, but it's been a long time since Klingon has allowed himself to get into foul trouble. He's been very disciplined through this season and, hasn't had to play the likes of an Edey necessarily. And there's also a lot of times where he's not needed to play extremely heavy minutes necessarily because of the fact that UConn's been as good as they are. But yeah, February 14th was the last time that he picked up more than 3 fouls, and we've seen him with some unbelievable defensive performances since then, including in the tournament where he has blocked 4 shots, 5 shots, and 8 shots in 3 of their 5 tournament games. So we'll see. UConn might just be legendary status, and that's something that we can dive definitely more into tomorrow if they do pull that off. But on that note, that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Not just my show, but the rest of the incredible shows we have here at the network. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. We will see you then. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.